The early risers. Who were the early risers? Davey Duhamel, Matt Kraut, me and Matt Kraut. We had a Little League basketball empire, I would say. Racked up championships at the YMCA, me and that guy. Ryan, tonight's guest is Dave Katz. He is the head of Fox Sports Digital. And he should be joining in just a second. He's a bit of a newbie to this stuff, so there he is, Matt. Bit of a newbie, but he'll adapt quickly. And there he is. There he is.
What's up, Matt?
How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I love it. I couldn't be doing better. You know, I'm looking forward to diving in neck deep, head deep, as far as however deep you can dive into the sports world, into the sports broadcasting world. That's how deep we're going to dive. We're going to dive into some Dave Katz history, a man who has seen it all through the state of digital sports media back since, Yahoo was a relevant, admirable company. And through it
I
all
wrote that.
without a doubt. Well, not even you could have done to it what it has been done to it, but they went pretty deep on it. So Dave, you are currently the executive vice president of digital at Fox Sports. Why don't you tell us a little bit about where you've been and how you got to where you are?
Well, first of all, speaking of digging deep, I have dug deep into the Nielsen ratings. This is obviously something that we track very intensely over at Fox. And there's this newbie on the block, BNN, that is creeping up on everyone, had record ratings for the month of April. And don't think we don't have you in our sight. Fox News is going to take aim at you pretty soon. Be careful, Matt.
Yeah. I'm in the
careful.
crosshairs, man. Listen, I've been able to get away with it so far, making myself a target. The spouting whale has not yet been harpooned. Yes, Johnny Zerden, it is not Chardonnay, it is Pinot Grigio. Obviously, I'm a Pinot Grigio type. Okay, so anyways, tell us, just to give people some background. I mean, a lot of people in sports media, particularly digital sports media, have gotten into it over the past 10, 15 years. You've been in digital sports media since digital was a thing. Just to give people a little frame of reference here, there's a man named Adrian Wojnarowski, who you may be familiar of. He's by far the biggest basketball journalist in the world. Dave Katz here hired Adrian Wojnarowski for his first job ever. So that just gives you a little perspective about where Dave has been and how long and what positions he's held in the digital sports media world. So Dave, why don't you just get a quick background and what you're doing right now?
You have just given away my age to all your millennial followers. This is
I don't think there was much mystery about your age, dude. Don't worry.
Oh boy. Okay. So yes, I've been in the digital sports space and really the digital space for quite a long time. If you go back, I'm a reform management consultant, started doing that in New York back in the day, and got a job with CBS television. And at the time, it was in this new group doing strategy and interactive. And they didn't really know what that meant. We were trying to figure it out. These were the early days when CBS didn't even have Sportsline, which has become the CBSSports.com platform. These are the days of giving out promotion in exchange for equity, a bit of the Wild West, that we were trying to figure it all out. So I was there. I spent 8 years at CBS. 1 year into my time in New York, they moved me to the West Coast. And I worked for a guy named Leslie Moonves, who brought me over to the West Coast. And Leslie, we will put all the other stories and things aside, but Leslie could never have treated me better, gave me a big start, put me in charge of 2 divisions there, the strategy group and the internet group. And basically said, I have 2 rules: don't lose money and don't embarrass me. Not in that order. And we went on a big run. You're a big basketball fan. I convinced him to put the NCAA men's basketball tournament, otherwise known as March Madness, online for the first time ever.
Wow.
Way back in the day. And those were the days where if you put something like that on the internet, the fear in the television division was, you're going to destroy my TV ratings. How can you do this for free on the internet?
What year was this? What year specifically?
This is early 2000s.
Okay.
The first big deal was around 2002. And this was coming off the success we had with the first site that I built, which I went in and I asked them if we could try to do something a little different around internet content and see if we could work with a TV show in a different way that had been done in the past. Traditionally, it was a TV show, and you take the brochure from the upfront and you slap it on the internet. And that's the way websites were built around TV shows. And I asked them if we could do something a little different. And there was a producer that I met, and I was sitting in this pitch, and this pitch was a very different type of TV show than I had ever heard before. And the producer basically said, I need a younger audience in order to get this show, make it successful. And I'm willing to do anything. Can you please, on the internet side, do some good stuff with us? So I went to Moonves and I said, can you give me the resources to do one TV show website, and let me see if we can do it a little differently. And I picked a show that would be a summer show. It was a different type of format. I didn't think we'd get any traffic, thought it would fly below the radar. And the show was Survivor. Mark Burnett was the producer. He really pushed he understood the value of the younger consumer, and he really pushed that. He also was running promos aggressively on MTV back in the day for that show. And there are a lot of reasons why that show was so successful at that time, but we built a really cool website which kind of began this cat and mouse game with fans. And in a lot of ways, it ties in with where my career went, much more on the sports side, because we treated, without even consciously thinking about it, we treated Survivor like a sporting event. And every week was like the NFL game. And you didn't know how it was going to end, but you covered it with pregame, in-game, and post-game coverage, and used a lot of footage and a lot of highlights. And we started doing live shows. We were the first ones to ever do these live internet talk shows. I mean, you're now taking that medium to a completely different level, Matt. But we did this about 20 plus years ago with Survivor. The person kicked off the night before would appear live and answer questions from fans. Then we did it with Big Brother. We launched all the live video streams around Big Brother and built that into a subscription business and a big internet business, and just had a lot of fun as the world of entertainment was evolving from scripted into this new reality format. There were a lot of opportunities to do different types of programming. So that's really how I cut my teeth. If you go way, way back, I did my graduate degree in England. And it's because where, guys who had unfulfilling college basketball careers like myself could go with extra eligibility and play a little more. I'm sure you'll want to get into that later.
We will.
And then I went over to England, and this is literally, you won't even be able to understand this, but I was the last class that graduated college without access to email or with this thing called the internet. It did not exist. I did all my papers on a word processor. So I go to England, and now the internet's there, and I'm at this Cambridge University was like the science college over there. And they have these like 9-baud modems and this little computer lab, and I'm wasting so much time watching these pages load that I decided to write my thesis on internet strategy for media companies. And that's what kind of got me into the CBS opportunity. And then since then, I did work at Yahoo, ran sports and entertainment and original content, did my own thing for 10 years at a company called The Post Game, and then joined Fox Sports a little over a year and a half ago, running the digital side.
The main point from the thread through all of that being that Dave has been on the front lines of figuring out sports media and what sports is going to look like as broadcasted and as packaged for the consumer on the internet for going on, over 20 years now. Okay, so now, you're figuring out what needs to be done on the digital side over at Fox Sports. Okay, so obviously we've got a current situation. A comment that you made to me a couple weeks ago when I was kind of inquiring with you about what the sports media landscape is going to be post-COVID. You said sports and sports media in general, and sports broadcasting, all is going to be reliant on one thing. It's going to be reliant on the NFL coming back in 2020 with or without fans. If you could unpack that, give us a little bit. Yes, Giles, I said unpack within the first 10 minutes. If you could discuss that a little bit, tell us a little bit about that observation, what we can expect from the NFL, and good God, I mean, what's the NFL going to look like in an 80,000 seat stadium that's usually filled with pageantry and energy and fans, and look with these NFL players playing a scrimmage essentially with no fans.
Look, I think the NFL is the only sport that its ratings rival those of BNN's. So the importance of the NFL, and really the NFL drives so much of the economic value of broadcast television. Many people have written reports over the years that they thought broadcast TV was on its way out if it weren't for live sports, and in particular the NFL. And the NFL made a very wise decision years ago. You can look back on it today, at a time where the NBA put its product on cable television because there was a better economic model there. The NFL stayed tried and true to its broadcast roots. And what that's allowed it to do is kind of maintain its dominance in terms of audience. People don't realize the scale of what these games are bringing in on a Sunday afternoon, or now a Thursday night or a Sunday night. So much of the success, certainly the importance of it to Fox is evident. There's an amazing article you can go back and read. I think it was done about 1.5 years ago on the 25th anniversary of Fox Sports, and how that whole thing came down and how Rupert Murdoch made this bold move to go in and steal the rights away effectively from CBS Television, who was one of the earliest broadcasters.
This is something that a lot of people who are viewing it right now are not going to understand the gravity of what happened. Everybody, you got to understand that back in the mid to early 90s, Fox, the channel Fox, was definitely the redheaded stepchild of the broadcasting world. It was in some markets only on, a few hours a day. It was very up and coming. So all the major sports were on CBS, ABC, NBC, and Fox was clearly Fox Network, not Fox News, not Fox Sports. Fox Network was clearly the number 4 station nationwide. And Fox Sports went in. Fox went in and somehow stole the NFL from CBS. This was a groundbreaking moment in sports and broadcasting history, and changed the landscape of television forever. Let me give you a real quick story. My entertainment law school professor, Ken Ziffrin, at UCLA Law School, is known as the #1 deal maker in the television world over the past 30 years. If you are a broadcast network, if you're a league and you need someone to negotiate a broadcast rights deal, Ken Ziffrin is your man. And he told us an amazing story about how he was in the negotiations on behalf of the NFL with Fox, and that when Fox came in with Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, obviously very prominent, always very prominent in the sports broadcasting world. He's on the front lines of the negotiation of all big deals. Jerry Jones is in the conference room as the Fox executives are about that. So CBS makes its offer. Fox comes in to give their presentation. Rupert Murdoch and their executives give their presentation on what offer they're going to make for NFL rights for Fox. When Rupert Murdoch dropped the number they were offering the NFL, Ken Ziffrin says he saw Jerry Jones literally levitate out of his seat. That's literally what happened. So that gives you a little bit of the framework of understanding just how significant it was at the time for Fox to take the NFL away from CBS.
And I mean, Rupert's move, I don't know that the Fox network, even though they had Married with Children and ultimately they had The Simpsons, it's hard to imagine that network surviving if it didn't get the NFL. And around Fox Sports, we would say Fox is football, and we would include college football along with that, but it's really the DNA of the culture at Fox. So clearly important. It put us on the map. There actually was no sports division when they made that move. So for the NFL the money was great, but what they really did that was genius was they took a risk putting their brand in the hands of someone who had never done it before. That's a big risk. But what they did was they created this extra competitor. And by taking CBS out of the mix, the negotiating dynamic the next time the rights came around was completely different. Because when you keep one hungry party completely out of something wanting it, then you're guaranteed to bring a new entrant to the negotiating table every time, and it keeps everyone honest. And I joined CBS in the late 90s when we did not have the NFL. And it was a little bit of a morbid place. And I was there probably 1 year in when we got the NFL back, and it changed the entire dynamic of CBS. So the NFL is truly the national pastime of this country today. We can argue, and it's probably another discussion about, baseball when I was growing up was the national pastime. Over the last 30 years, the NFL has become that dominant force. And then the question is, what sport is most well positioned for the future? Could it be the NBA? Is it a global type sport? That's a very interesting debate for another time. But the NFL is pretty critical, and I'm glad you had me on today. We were just doing a live show around the NFL draft, which was released today at 8:00 Eastern. And the amazing thing about this, the NFL is so good that they take something where we all know who the opponents are, because the teams are all locked based on a formula. So there is no surprise that the Ravens are playing these 16 teams over these 17 weeks. The only drama is what week are we playing them and who's playing in prime time or who's playing on Thursday night. And they've turned that into an incredible event. So we covered it from all angles tonight. And I guess we can dig into kind of some of the specifics and some of the interesting aspects that came out of it. But I think the headline here is the NFL provided a very traditional schedule. Like, this is a kind of business as usual schedule. It doesn't mean there aren't some thoughts that they've given to how things could play out. But in terms of the way they're putting the games and the way they're laying them out, they're going to do what they should do, which is move forward as though everything is going to happen. Be cautious, pay attention to what the doctors and the scientists and the politicians are saying, and then adapt accordingly. But this far out, when you don't know, they're going to make all plans to proceed as though, in a responsible manner, they're going to move forward as we have expected in years past. Now, it's a very interesting dynamic. You have 32 teams playing over many different states, and every state has a different set of rules potentially for what will or won't be allowed. And for a league that really prides itself on a fair competitive dynamic and rules that apply to everyone, not to say that certain teams don't have better home field advantages, but that's really the doing of the franchise and the local community. This is going to be interesting because there's a lot of things that you might end up facing that you've never faced before. For example, what if one DMA does not allow fans at all? And what if another
one what?
DMA, the demographic market. It's basically how they rank markets. What's called a city, in other terms, non-TV terms. So one city, one state. Sorry, it's going to have your BNN. You need to know about DMAs. Come on.
Now we do.
So what do you do if California is very restrictive in terms of where you're allowed to play, if you're allowed to play without fans, if you're allowed to field a team? What do you do if you can't play in a certain stadium? We can get into all those dynamics, but there's a very interesting philosophy that the league has. And I may get the terminology slightly wrong, but the idea is that each team will host their games to their greatest local accommodation. So what that means is if you are able to pack the house, and that is something you choose to do and your state allows, and then you can do that. And if your state does not allow it and you don't feel you want to do that, then you won't do that. And it's going to be very interesting. We don't know how this is all going to play out. We don't know what the landscape looks like, but we're going into it believing that and hoping that there's an NFL season in full. And there's some amazing matchups and some great storylines that they have kind of put out there for us to tantalize us with.
What does this look like if no fans? Is that a possibility? Has this been discussed? Is this what they're expecting? It's kind of difficult to envision it's both. This is the weird thing. It's both difficult to envision 80,000 people in a stadium, and it's difficult to envision them playing with 80,000 people in a stadium. And it's also difficult to envision them playing without anybody in the stadium.
You'd have to ask the Bengals what it's like to play without anyone in the stadium. But sorry, AFC North, zing. All right.
There's nobody from Cincinnati out there.
But look, my opinions are mine alone. There is no quote unquote Fox Sports opinion. There is no league opinion at this point. There's a lot of theories, a lot of conjecture, and a lot of planning. So I think they're planning for every possible scenario. But what would the experience look like? There is, just think through it. There is a debate about do you pipe fan noise in to this? Will a team play crowd noise?
Wow.
Will they be allowed to put crowd noise? Will a team play? Will the networks feel like they want the ambient noise of nothing, or do they want do they want to mic up more players? Do we make it a very different experience? And then for the fans that are there, if you have a half-filled stadium or a third or a quarter-filled stadium, then the question is, what does that feel like? And I think differently. What is the quality of play going to look like? How much do these guys do when they lay out for a catch, or they risk their body going over the middle to make an incredible hit, and they're kind of risking life and limb? a lot of them are doing it for, yes, their teammates and yes, the game and the win, but there's also this adrenaline rush of doing it in front of the fans and the adulation and the cheer of the fans, or the boos and the hisses from the other side. They feed off that energy. So a stadium that has no energy is going to be a very different feeling, a very different product. When you hear the sidelines, you know, there was the Baltimore Orioles game, so now I can rip on my Baltimore Orioles, but we actually played a game with no fans, and it wasn't because no fans showed up. That was when there was the riots in Baltimore, and they didn't allow fans to come into the stadium. And they shut the gates, and everyone, you could hear the announcer in the booth talking about you as you were stepping into the batter's box. Showalter, our manager, could hear signs being exchanged in the opposing team's, dugout.
Wow.
So you hush the crowd, you quiet it down. It's going to be it's almost a different sport. It's going to be really fascinating.
That's going to be a fascinating experiment in seeing what the intangible crowd impact on athletics are, on physical and human performance and whatnot. And I think that's going to yield some really interesting observations. Okay, so another topic that's kind of a perennial topic in anything we discuss around the COVID situation is how, in recalibrating anything regarding whether it's real estate, restaurants, clubs, sports, whatnot, the economy is so interconnected that everything sets off a chain reaction. You've got players need to renegotiate with teams. Teams need to renegotiate with leagues, with broadcasters like yourself. Broadcasters need to renegotiate with sponsors, and there's this entire chain reaction. Everything is kind of interconnected. You know, obviously you're uniquely positioned to be able to describe that from a number of different angles. So I'd love to hear those angles.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting now is I wouldn't even say that everyone's renegotiating today. I think everyone's trying to just figure it out. So as you mentioned, there's this value chain where fans pay money. They either pay money to show up and go to a game, or they pay money with their cable package. And essentially they're funding the broadcast networks and the cable networks with a much heavier weight towards the cable networks. Without even realizing it, every person who has some form of a cable package is paying, let's call it $10 a month for ESPN and the suite of ESPN channels. And you're subsidizing every sports fan, every viewer is subsidizing the sports fan. So for you and I, $10 a month for ESPN is the greatest bargain in the history of television.
Sure.
We probably pay 5x that a month easy and not blink because it's so seminal to what we're watching. But a lot of people don't realize that. And in the same way, you're probably subsidizing HGTV by whatever they're getting, $1 a month or 50 cents a month. So everything's kind of connected in this bundle, and fans are paying for it somehow, some way. Then those cable networks are paying a per subscriber fee, a per sub per month fee to the broadcast networks and the cable networks. That, along with advertising revenue, allows us to figure out the economics and decide how much we're able to bid on the rights. And there's this game of trying to figure out what really drives viewership, what are people willing to pay up for, both fans as well as cable networks and satellite companies, for example. And then that flows down to the sports leagues, who get a rights fee. And then that rights fee, there's all kinds of formulas, and it all depends on the league, but that rights fee is shared typically as a percentage of revenue with the players. So in the NBA, it may be 50-50 based on whatever definition of net revenue exists in that world. And I think with the NFL, there's a new collective bargaining agreement where it's going from like 47% to the players to 48, 49%, where I don't know exactly where it ended up. But they are heavily incentivized to make this product as good as possible on the field or the court, because the better the product, the higher the ratings, the more the revenue, the higher the rights fees in the future, so on and so forth. So here you're in a situation where games stopped. The world has stopped. And what do you do? You're a lawyer. You're familiar with the concept of force majeure. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to get into any of that stuff. But the idea of, it's almost like a force majeure clause is set up to, what do you do in the event of a tornado? Well, we are in a tornado, and that tornado hasn't stopped. And we don't know when we're going to come out of the other end of that. So you notice a lot of these events haven't been canceled. They've been postponed. When you postpone it, you don't necessarily refund the money yet, because you're still thinking those games or events will happen, and therefore you hold on to the money. Everything's in this stasis right now. And at some point, decisions are going to be made. We have Bundesliga coming back, which is a Fox property, on May 16th. It'll be on FS1. We have NASCAR coming back the next day on May 17th on Fox as well. So, and interestingly, we missed a bunch of races with NASCAR. So they're going to try to true up the schedule. And for the first time ever, the cup races won't just be on Sunday. They're going to be on Wednesdays or midweek and Sundays. They're going to do races in different areas 2 a week. So then the question comes to, like, what is that worth? Is it still worth the same? And I'm not involved in any of those conversations, and they'll figure out what is a fair economical way, because we're partners with a lot of these leagues, both for a long time historically and a long time in the future. And we need to have a solution that works for everyone. Yeah. I heard last night you were talking about, like, will NBA players go in a bubble and will they play and everything? And I could not agree more with your assessment of, like, you put a $5, $10, $15 million check in front of someone who's saying, oh, I don't want to be away from my wife for this long. And all of a sudden it's like, we'll find a way to make it work.
Under normal circumstances, things that people would not consider in a million years, under normal circumstances, they will consider when the other option is losing a ton of money. Okay, that's just a fucking reality, guys. And we are in a weird period of American history, of world history, where the opportunity costs of things have completely shifted. Where there may be the opportunity costs of not doing something are too high. The opportunity cost of missing out, of saying, hey, I'm going to have to not see my wife and kids for 2-3 weeks, or even maybe a month. If that's what it takes to get this league back, to get some type of content, some type of sort of competition back and revive that, you're going to, it's going to incentivize people one way or the other. Speaking of that, and in terms of economic incentives and things that are just very complicated economically. Okay. I think people take it for granted because you guys in sports media make it look so simple. Every NFL broadcast is a fucking symphony. It is 50 cameras. It is graphics. It is beyond anything. It's a VR graphic extravaganza. It's coordination. It's just incredibly complicated to run an NFL broadcast, the pageantry of it all. And so if you're looking at how you broadcast an NFL game, it's not just about getting the players on the field and the coaches on the sidelines. It's organizing this entire vast array of production capabilities and cameras and everything. And, how are you guys viewing that? Are you going to have to, is this situation, even in being able to to broadcast some of these games, are you going to cut back? What's that looking like?
You're right. So the technical complexity is off the charts. The first thing that struck me when I joined Fox is I went into this room that's almost like the bridge of on Star Trek. Kind of the doors open, and then you have this monitor, and it's the transmission operations center, which is basically the nerve center for the network. And I used to think, watch out, these big digital companies, because I spend so much time in digital, are coming for these rights, and they're going to take these rights. And there's certain times where I say, the technical complexity of distributing the game, we'll talk about producing the game, but distributing the game may not be that complicated. It's from one endpoint to the end. It's being streamed. It's fine. But think about, since we're talking so much about the NFL, think about an NFL Sunday. An NFL Sunday might have 6 games going on concurrently in the Fox window that are being distributed to, and I don't know the exact number, but call it 215 local markets. And we are regionalizing and flexing them. And we're basically creating virtual networks on the fly. So you set up your network saying, we're going to put Green Bay, Dallas in this market, but this market next to them, we're not, because Chicago game bleeds into there, and that's more of a Chicago fan. So we regionalize these networks, and the ability when a game ends to then switch it to another game. If you've ever seen, now we'll go for bonus coverage.
How do you guys do that? That is mind-boggling.
It's the most, you see this once. I'll have you over, Matt, on a Sunday for you to kind of see how this happens. And the communication between the league and the broadcaster and what's happening technically and how they're mapping all this. And it's unbelievable. And you can't just do it. So not saying a company can't come in and figure it out over time, but it is incredibly technically complex.
Sure.
That is getting, once the signal gets into Fox Lot over on Pico and is distributed. To get the game, as you said, I think in the Super Bowl, we had almost 100 cameras doing that last Super Bowl game. And think about what a director is doing when they're sitting there in the truck, in the control room, and they have 100 screens in front of them, and they are calling the game. And I equate this to, imagine if you're a film director and you have a general script, but you don't really have a full script. You kind of know the scene starts here, and I got 2 actors and the scene starts here. Now go. And what that director is doing is basically cutting a feature film in real time, not with one camera like a theatrical film director is doing, but with 30, 40, 50, 100 cameras in real time, and you get one chance to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can go back and you show replays and you can get different angles.
And they never, maybe that they do screw it up. It feels like they never screw it up. It feels like it always unfolds almost perfectly.
You don't know the shots that they wanted to put in and didn't put in.
Okay.
But at the same time, that's why you have instant replay, and that's why you have different camera angles. And certain sports lend themselves to this. Like the NFL's got that kind of shot clock in between each play, the play clock, and you can kind of roll back through things and tell the story a little differently. And I think Fox has been, really innovative over the years at figuring out ways to put unique graphics on the screen or different camera angles, pylon cam, all kinds of stuff to give people different perspective, which has allowed a league like the NFL to do instant replay. They couldn't do instant replay if the networks weren't as good at actually producing this content as they are. So imagine all of that stuff. If you just saw the trucks that are rolled out to these things, the complexity of doing a Daytona 500 and putting cameras everywhere and having them come back and having the graphics and having in-car cameras for cars that are going 200 miles an hour around the track, and having that stuff not buffer and be seamless, and to go into the storytelling. I mean, these people are truly the best in the world at what they do. And that's why they have a whole sports Emmy category, is to recognize the excellence of what these guys do. And that's just TV production. That's not pre-game, post-game shows. That's not the other types of studio shows during the week. That's not the features, the E60s and the stuff that's more investigative. So there's so much that goes into these sports networks and the productions. But what's interesting is remote production before the pandemic consisted of rolling up a truck for the most part to an event, having it satellited or fibered back, and having physical people there holding cameras and focusing it and getting that stuff back. And then the other half of our production work was studio work, right? You see all of our FS1 lineup, and you see ESPN's, daily lineup, NFL Live and all their shows, or our shows like The Herd and Undisputed and things like that. Those shows are done in a studio environment, right? And everything's locked down and everything's perfect and best camera people are on it. Now you have a pandemic situation where you can't come into the building, and how you roll a truck up to an event and how many people you can put into a truck and what the graphics packages are going to look like and who's running the graphics, and can people sit near each other? They can't. And how do you wipe everything down and everything to the lav mics? Everyone's going to have their own lav mics because you're not going to want to share lav mics. And
yeah,
everything is being rethought top to bottom.
Yeah.
As it relates to studio production, we were very lucky on the digital team. We had done a ton of live video shows, almost like test cases. And, I was listening to some Navy SEALs give this whole speech about leadership in times of crisis. And the key to all that is you have to stress test your team before the stressor occurs. Uh-huh. And over the last year, we did 15 what we call live watch parties, where they're kind of second screen experiences on digital platforms while you're watching a live game. And for the Super Bowl, we basically built out a closet at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami. I hired Brett Favre, Joe Montana, Drew Brees, and we had those three legends.
We were at CES while you were closing this deal at XS for fucking
yeah, that's right. That's when my one deal blew up with 2 other guys that'll remain nameless, and we went to what turned out to be a much better show. And then putting that together and doing a live production, basically this pure internet streaming, really gave us the chops when this pandemic hit to say, how do we rethink the whole production area? So tomorrow we're going to shoot about 8 hours of live television through our digital technical director's garage.
What's the content?
everything from The Herd that you watch that ends up on TV to special shows. We have Fox Football Now. We have Inside Soccer. We have the show that we aired tonight that we're going to put up tomorrow, which is our special on the NFL schedule release. We've got an MLB show that we're doing. So all of this stuff is now being produced with talent sitting in their homes, cameras, either webcams or something a little better, lighting, little tiny lighting kits if we can get it to them, and not everyone has them. And through some, believe it or not, half the time you're using Zoom. Half the stuff you see on TV that ESPN or we or anyone else is doing is simply Zoom feeds coming in and being treated through basically a production control center. And that production control center was set up, for example, by our technical director on the digital side. So this entire show is being basically done outside of the lot. And we're producing tens of hours a week of this stuff. And yes, I think people are used to the fact that it's not perfectly lit and the people aren't standing next to each other. And we've kind of very quickly become used to the formats are a little bit different. But the quality of the conversation is the same. It's good. And I think the creativity is making it work. So we hope we get back in the studio. We hope we get being able to do these live events. We know we have a few on the docket. But I think the way we produce this stuff's never going to be exactly the same. There's going to be a lot of learns in this, and we're going to apply that to the future and probably come out stronger and more efficient.
That's a question for you. And this is a question that I'm asking across industries. What observations are you making now is there anything you're seeing right now that may give you some insight into things you did not notice about your business previously, and aspects of things that are now coming to the surface and that you're engaging in now that you think are going to carry forward even when we get back to real life?
Are you talking about beyond the production techniques that we're talking about, or
anything?
Well, the best thing for me, the thing that's most fun is, look, I've been at Yahoo. It was like I was the entertainment guy at a digital company, and then at CBS at Fox, I was the digital guy at an entertainment company. So I've always kind of been on the outside of what has been kind of the primary focus of these businesses.
Sure.
And inside, you're trying to chip away and be a change agent and come up with ideas, but you're never the most important thing that the company does, right? And that's going to be true for a long time. But the change that's happened is our talent, who are so used to this rhythm of being in front of people and engaging with fans, at least through the big screen in your living room, felt, I think, this loss of connection when they were at home on the shelf, so to speak. The amount of talent that has reached out to us saying, can you get us, and I'm going to use the finger quotes, on air? Can you get us out there? Can we do shows? I'm willing to do stuff for you. So I think the great breakthrough from my selfish perspective is people are going to start looking at this as not like ESPN and ESPN Digital, or, Turner and Bleacher Report, or Fox and Fox Sports Digital. It's like, it's now Fox and Fox Sports. And we're all a part of the team, and we all have different angles and different skills and different levels of production quality. Like, you're not going to have our digital team ever produce a Super Bowl, but we're going to produce a lot of shoulder programming and a lot of stuff around it. And I think we can do it at that level. So talent has really bought in. And now imagine a world where all of the talent, to make it really easy on them, now have cameras in their living rooms or their office or wherever.
And are now probably more used to and more willing to engage in that.
So before, and I said this also about the whole work from home versus work in an office thing. My previous company, we started working from home with the thought we'd get an office. We ended up never getting an office after 10 years in LA because we found that we were more efficient. There was no going to the office and leaving the office and feeling like I don't have to do that work now. I'm done with the office. I'm now in my personal time. You kind of shrink the connection between work life and personal life, which as an entrepreneur or someone running the division is a good thing. So I think the same thing's for talent. It's not like I've left the studio, I'm done for the day. Kawhi Leonard announces he's going with the Clippers on Friday night, and we don't have a studio show till Monday morning. So is Fox Sports not on the air or not getting any content for the whole weekend? Sure. When that news breaks? Kobe Bryant passed away on a Sunday the week before the Super Bowl. We all happened to be in a hotel room in a big conference room in Miami when the news broke, and we kind of all came together, but we didn't have access to our talent till the next morning. Imagine a world where these cameras are there, and as news breaks and flows, you can access the most important voices in sports almost instantaneously. You can cover the world of sports better. You can engage fans better. That Sunday afternoon, when the Kobe news broke, fans were reaching out and just trying to connect and share stories, and the internet won that night because TV really couldn't do too much. And the best conversations were happening in a digital environment. Well, if you could now infuse TV talent or network talent into that, I think you can really serve fans better. So that was a big takeaway. I think that maybe it's just wishful thinking that talent is now used to working with us, used to shooting stuff at home. It's not embarrassing to shoot stuff where I got my bookshelf in my background or my kids are walking in the screen. It's a new world, and I think that will continue.
Yeah, and this is just very evidence of a lot of trends that I think we're going to see, that we are seeing across, once again, across a lot of different industries, that a lot of activities that made sense, that are rational activities that people really did not engage in just because of hang-ups, and because worries about custom and practice. They weren't, even something as simple as what you're describing as talent. Troy Aikman, whoever, being comfortable enough to go broadcast from, why would he not broadcast from his home? If people want to hear what Troy Aikman has to say about this week's events, or what may have, a trade that just went down in the NFL, why do they have to get Troy Aikman in the studio with makeup? He's Troy Aikman. His name is Troy Aikman. Why would anyone named Troy Aikman ever need makeup? Besides the fact, and that a lot of these sacred cows have been slayed. A lot of the guardrails are off, and it's a brave new world. And I think people have gotten comfortable with a lot of behaviors and a lot of activities that they had hang-ups about previously. And no, I'm not just talking about BNN, but a lot of people had hang-ups and concerns, and now those are cast aside. They're comfortable with broadcasting from any time, broadcasting in any circumstance, and that's going to carry forward a lot.
100%. And by the way, I mean, everyone's run out and gotten that same plant that you have in the background. There was a run on those plants. I don't know what kind, you got a Porsche behind you or something. That's great. Like, you're going to start turning that into an e-commerce business at BNN. I have no doubt.
We are. All right. Shout out to two people. Mallory K, my interior I'm not going to call her my interior designer because I don't have enough space that would be bullshit. But she did choose this photograph and this plant for me, Mallory K. And then Brianna Hess, who was someone who was just a randomly found me, was enjoying my content, and reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm an interior designer. We got to do something about you just staring at that wall with that fucking vent." Everyone remember the vent? I hope you do not remember the vent. The vent was a terrible, disgraceful.
It was a dark time. It was a dark time, Matt.
So Brianna Hess, thank you very much. I'm going to hit you up. Okay, let's shift to another sport. We've talked a lot of NFL and a lot of general. It's a very fascinating time for Major League Baseball. You'll get a little bit more into detail, but there's more of a macro picture here. Major League Baseball, in terms of not engaging in activities and not trying out new tactics and things that make sense, that are rational, but being stifled because of custom and practice and tradition. Nothing sticks that nothing. Major League Baseball is the number one culprit there, of not doing things that make sense because of tradition. This year, because of these circumstances, because that's all been busted up, Major League Baseball is going to be experimenting. Tell us a little bit about and that's coming up. The NFL, August, September. Major League Baseball is supposed to be fucking starting right now. So give us a little insight into what Major League Baseball is looking at, and how they're going to be experimenting on a lot of stuff, not just directly COVID related, but beyond that, they should have been experimenting with a long time ago.
Look, I haven't spoken with MLB directly. I know what I read, and you hear about a lot of different things, but I will say, and I've been on record for this, I think this is the most important season in the history of Major League Baseball. Yeah. And the reason I say that is, like you were mentioning, a lot of the things that have held baseball back from innovation, this is your opportunity to try everything. This is an asterisk season in almost every sport, maybe not the NFL, but you're going to put an asterisk next to it. It's going to be a different number of games played. It's going to be this major stoppage in between a season. There's always going to be a story that goes behind, well, this team was crowned a champion, but it was different because of A, B, C, and D. And with Major League Baseball, there were a lot of rule changes that maybe the PA was not, the Players Association was not interested in implementing, or the traditionalists were not focused on. But I do think Rob Manfred, who's the commissioner of baseball, has been very interested in trying to change the game. And he's almost implemented a pitch clock, so the pitchers have to pitch more quickly. And he's really tried to both clean up the sport in some regards and also speed up the games and make them more millennial focused and user friendly, to the extent you can do that with a sport that is what it is. So I think it's really interesting. Now, what I'm reading, just like anyone else, is the goal is early July as a start. So you can kind of picture, let's just put it out there, July 1 or July 4th. That's kind of a big holiday weekend for us. What a great time to start playing the American pastime, Major League Baseball. It's going to likely be a shortened season, 90 games.
You were saying about
something like that.
90 games, roughly?
Maybe it's 90. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think the league wants to go too much further past when they would normally have gone. I don't think they want to run baseball games into December. I don't think they want to go, and it gets cold in a lot of these environments. You can't play a Minnesota game too late in the season. It's just not fair, and you can't do it. They don't have a dome stadium. So you got to be sensible with the calendar. It'll probably be a shortened season. There's also this, you're not going to travel around the country the way you were before. You're not putting people in planes. You're not trying to do all this. So what does that mean? That probably means more regional clustering of games. Now, you already kind of had that, although AL, NL is not a geographic thing the way it is more in basketball with Eastern, Western Conference.
So that's an interesting question. Are they going to simply disregard leagues for the year and classify and organize geographically as opposed to based on league?
I don't know. But you could see a situation where if you're doing this geographically, you might just say that Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, both New York teams, and Boston, well, that's a little bit of, both leagues are going to be kind of playing each other more round robin style. Now, to a certain extent, that happens. You don't play an equal number of interleague games as you do in-league games anyway. The Orioles always play a lot of the Red Sox and a lot of the Yankees, and those guys play it themselves. So how much really changes? I don't really know. You could kind of make the mix more AL, NL by putting 75% of your games, for example, among AL opponents in that region. But I don't see the Orioles getting on a plane and flying out to play the Los Angeles Angels. And what does baseball look like in the state of California with the way our rules are and things like that? So there's a lot to be worked out. I think most likely you're not going to see fans at these games. I just think given how soon this is coming up on us, the taking fans out of the equation is probably the most realistic now, but maybe you can get to that later in the year. Maybe postseason baseball, fans are back. Maybe they're doing what they do in other countries. You have to wear a mask in the stadium like they're doing in Asia right now. Maybe they will change the seating arrangements inside so you can't sit next to someone. You have to sit a seat or two away from people. I don't know. But I think you might see a very different paradigm in terms of the way these teams play a regular season. And then as it relates to postseason, this is supposed to be the first year that they add an extra playoff team. So you might end up with more playoff, postseason baseball. I think they were talking about getting rid of the one-game wild card game and maybe making that a best of three. And one team gets a bye and the other 6 teams in the AL or the NL have to play that first kind of round game. I don't know exactly how that's going to play out, but I think the trickle down effect of all this is, think about baseball is so dependent on a minor league system. You have small rosters and then you expand at the end of the season, but all your players are getting all these reps in a minor league environment. So baseball and a lot of these other sports are maybe a little more heavily weighted towards TV revenue. TV revenue is more important than the gate. Well, in baseball, the gate's important, but in basketball, the gate's important. But, football, comparatively speaking, the TV rights are worth a lot more than the gate if you had to lose something. So in minor league baseball, there is no value to any TV rights. None. It is 100% spectator driven. It's the local people buying tickets, going in, buying hot dogs, taking their family to an affordable evening of entertainment. So
and while these are not big revenue drivers, they're critical pieces of the infrastructure of Major League Baseball.
And they're critical infrastructure to small town America.
Yeah.
When you have 60 games in, Fredericksburg or any of these little towns, that's really meaningful. That's a community experience. So I think what you're going to see with minor league baseball is, how do you play a season? You can't. You're going to have to shut that down. And then the question is, what happens to your players? So do you expand the rosters of the major league team and carry more players? By carrying more players, does that start their MLB career? Because that makes them eligible for free agency sooner. What do you do with the players who are not good enough to be on an MLB expanded roster and would be playing? So maybe they turn the spring training facilities into some form of developmental league that's controllable. I've heard you on all of your various things talk about testing and tracing and all that stuff. It all flows through the world of sports. Are these guys able to get tested before they step on the field of play? How frequently can they get tested? How can all the people who have to be in that closed environment get tested? What happens if someone fails a test? What is the protocol for that? All of those things have to be worked out. It's an incredibly complicated time for that. And baseball is a private enterprise. I don't know if you want to talk at all about college football, but that's arguably the second biggest sport.
For sure. We're going to get to college football in just a second. To stick with contact tracing and testing and how sports is indicative of a lot of other things that are going on around COVID treatment and management and whatnot. The NBA clearly, and they've made no bones about it, is concerned about the optics of looking like they're draining resources away from. There's limited testing. There's limited medical capacity, even though not as limited as we thought. The NBA is clearly worried about controversy, bad press, and optics from saying, something, people can't all get tested, but we're going to go test all of these NBA players so that the NBA can finish the season. They think that's going to reflect very poorly about it. Are other sports expressing that concern? Because I'm thinking that Adam Silver and the NBA might be letting their minds run a little wild. I don't think there's going to be as much controversy around it as they think.
Well, I'm going to go off on a quick tangent here.
Sure.
I believe Adam Silver has had the most challenging year in the history of any American sports commissioner, and maybe any sports commissioner in the world at any time. If you think about what his year has involved, his year started off with Daryl Morey making a tweet about the Chinese. If you remember, that
quite a ride for the NBA
this
the last
season.
3 months.
Okay. Then he had fallout of the second most important global market, where he has a major joint venture with the nation of China around NBA China, and them saying, we're not carrying NBA games in our country anymore. And then LeBron coming out and getting chastised for what side is he on, human rights or another. And
Sure.
this whole thing started hurting their ratings at the beginning of the year. Then a guy who ended up being a mentor towards the last 5-6 years of my career, the former commissioner, David Stern, who every time I went to New York would welcome me into his office and share stories and help me think through my small business. And then ultimately, I wouldn't have joined Fox necessarily without him giving me his thoughts and his blessing on that. And he passed away just at the beginning of the year, called January 1st. Then you had a month later, Kobe Bryant passes away. And then you have a global pandemic that shuts down your entire league when you have 2+ months left in the season. You're 6 games away in many of these local markets from having the full amount of games needed to get the RSN money. And everything that you could have go wrong this year went wrong for Adam Silver. But he is incredibly bright. He is incredibly thoughtful. He is a leader. He's very well respected among the ownership and the players, which is rare. Usually you have a lot of tension between those two. And Adam Silver has done as good a job as you could ever do, kind of keeping this on track and setting themselves up for it. So if you think he's being a little overly cautious, oh, and by the way, sorry, I didn't mention, he was the first guy to shut his league down with the Rudy Gobert incident. He was the first league that had a player test positive for it. So he's had to kind of write this playbook in real time. So, and to come back, it'll be the sport that everyone's watching the most to see how they finish the season. So, I think he's done a great job with that. And I think that, is he being overly cautious? I don't think so. I think he's being properly cautious. And he's thinking through every aspect of it. And that is what you have to do when you're both a public figure and you're a public entity that the NBA is, but you're also one that relies on local communities to support it. So I think you have to really kind of thread that needle, and safety and security is critical.
In terms of that, in terms of threading those needles publicly, public relations and optically, as a broadcaster and as a network, what are your concerns?
Look, I think as a broadcaster and a network, you want the product back on the court or on the field, and you want it on television. I think America,
Sure.
One of the big takeaways from the pandemic has been how much people miss live sports, and we kind of took it for granted. And we can't wait to have it back. So from our standpoint, we want it back. We want it back safely. We want it back with the best players being healthy. We don't want to start and stop. So how everyone comes back, the coming back process is critical. And people are gonna have to really think through that and make sure, are we better off coming back and finishing it under these circumstances, or are we better off punting? And, the season's a bust, it's done, and we're going to come back next year. That happened with March Madness. There was no March Madness this year. And think about all the college seniors or the top players in the country who you live for this moment. And for many of them, they'll never go to the pros. And this was it for them. You only have 60 kids drafted out of the thousands that play. So what do you end up doing at that point? You're done. You're over. So I think the goal is to have everyone come back. We want to finish these things. We believe in kind of the end. If you have the beginning, you want the end to go along with it. And it just rips your heart out when you can't, especially you as a Laker fan, man. You've waited a number of years to get your Lakers back in this type of position. Wouldn't you like to see, even with this stoppage, if they can finish it off and get another
we had some good vibes. We had, as Eric Pincus, who was on last night, who's fantastic and such a great guy and so insightful. The Lakers, after being possibly the most blessed fan base in the history of professional sports, pretty much from my birth, 1988, from my birth through 2010, the Lakers were the most blessed. You could not be a sports fan who enjoyed more than being a Lakers fan during that period. My birth and my life was synchronized with that. Since 2010, it has been one kick in the fucking nuts since after nonstop. Finally, this year, we just get an amazing groundswell of good feeling, good vibes, and then boom, this happens in Kobe Bryant's eyes. So I don't know. We'll have to see. Listen, so real quick, guys, we have more to talk about with Dave. We're about a minute and a half towards an hour. So I'm going to stop. We're going to fire it back up because we do have more to talk about. We're going to talk about sponsorship. We're going to talk about college football.
Gambling, sports gambling.
And we're going to talk about soccer. So we have a few really interesting topics.
And Matt, we're going to talk about player orgies with their brothers. Is that correct? The breaking news yesterday? Does BNN touch that?
We're going to touch that. I just had an hour-long talk about porn and gender relations before this chat, so might as well keep that energy going. Guys, I'm going to stop this, and then we're going to pop it back on in a second, okay? Howdy, folks. Childs. There's Dave. Okay.
Second half, we're going with the hard stuff. Let's go.
You were screwing around before. Get that going with the whiskey. Okay. So we've talked pro sports. Pro sports is centralized. Everything is run through a central private enterprise. Now we talk college sports. College sports is decentralized, right? You have the NCAA, but everything is a conference. you made a really good point when we discussed this yesterday about different conferences and different regions that have different conditions and different incentives maybe acting differently. So maybe you can break that down for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe you're going to break it down for us.
I have to. So I think college football in particular, I think is truly a reflection of their local communities. And you see the diversity of fan base and the diversity of emphasis for the sport. And it's a very geographic phenomenon.
Sure.
So, and in many regions around the country, college football is everything. That is what they live for. It is far bigger than the NFL. It is bigger than Major League Baseball, bigger than the NBA combined. So as we think about it, and again, I haven't spoken to any commissioners and don't know specifically what their plans are, but if you look at, Georgia opening back up early, and you look at California being very cautious about how they want to reopen, and you kind of trickle that down, and there's one other phenomenon here, which is within the college world, you not only have geographic regional situations and legalities, but you also have many of these colleges are state institutions.
Yeah.
They're effectively funded by state funding. It's funny when you look up the highest paid employee in almost every state. It is the college basketball or college football coach of the biggest university program in that state. Every time they make more than the provost and the trustees and all those. So you think about, let's regionalize this for a second. Pac-12 on the West Coast, cautious environment, very different approach to the pandemic. A lot of state universities, you have UCLA and you have, Berkeley, and you've got all these different institutions there up to, Washington, Oregon, et cetera. And then you've got SEC with a very different mentality and philosophy. And I don't want to get into what's the right philosophy or not, because you just got to hope and believe that these elected officials are doing what's right for their communities, and they know better than we do. But at the end of the day, if you don't think that the SEC is going to play their schedule this year, if I were a betting man, I would think that the SEC has shown that region of the country has shown every indication to want to get out there and to want to play their sport.
Yes.
So the trickle down of that, and I would also, my gut, and I know nothing, okay? My gut tells me SEC, Big 12, and Big 10 find a way to play. Now, does that mean play with no fans? Does that mean start with no fans and end with fans? Does that mean some teams can have fans and others can't? Don't know. It's all going to be different. But I think there is a will for those conferences to get out on the football field. What that means for practices and everything, I have no idea. Pac-12 and ACC are, to me, are the two that I hope we're in a different place as a society, that these are not even questions that have to be answered, that we're good and we can play. But let's say we can't. I think it's going to be really challenging for the Pac-12 to play a season this year, just seeing the way it's going. If you told me a conference was not going to play, my guess would be the Pac-12. And then you have the ACC, and they're a bunch of schools in there that they may not go for it. They just may not kind of make that next step.
Sure.
For a lot of reasons. So, but I don't know, and that's just conjecture. So I think that this is going to be regionalized. So how do you have a BCS championship at the end of the year if you only have a few of the conferences that are playing and not every conference is playing? Well, is it a tainted one? Some would argue that the SEC and the Big 12 and maybe an ACC team are pretty dominant anyways. You have the major teams in there. USC would disagree with that for many years, although not recently.
Sure.
So how does that look? How does that play out? Is that played in August, September, October, November, with bowl games in January? Does that schedule change? Is stuff pushed back? I don't know. But I think college football is one of those things where, because it's not a pro league, and it relies on so much state institutions coming together. And here's another question for you. What do you do with the student body?
Yeah.
So if you're the University of
What
Texas,
what if, meaning if colleges may not come back, but there still may be incentives to have college sports come back. So that is going to
but here's the question. Can you, if you're a state institution, University of Texas at Austin, can you not open your campus for students, but open your campus for football players? And if you say, I want to play football, I'll open my campus. What does that mean for students coming back? Are they expected to come back, not expected to come back? Is there virtual learning? What do they really want? I don't know, and I don't mean to pick on Texas. I was down for the Red River game against Oklahoma this year. It's one of the best experiences I've ever been to. Incredible. Yeah. So what does that look like? So the trickle down of decisions, by the way, that will be made months in advance about whether students are on campus and when they're on campus, may also have an effect on whether these colleges are able to field teams and have their programs play.
Yeah.
So what kind of incentives does that create? And so it's going to be a complicated and fascinating thing to figure out. And the presidents of the schools, the heads of the conferences, the people who run the state education systems all have to, and the NCAA have to come together and figure this out.
So Rich Greenfield, one of the best, and if you want to talk just leaders in his field in terms of covering, media and sports media in this regard, Rich Greenfield is one of the best in the business. He just mentioned, I think, the SEC and the Pac-10 and the SEC said, if no students on campus, no football. And I understand that because let's be honest, you're asking for a lawsuit. Unfortunately, someone's always looking for a reason to sue. And when there is selective enforcement and when policy is not implemented evenly across different categories, that always opens you up and creates a lot of legal liability, a lot of bad optics, and it's unfortunate. Another one of the situations where you can rationalize why you might have only virtual classes and schools might only open up virtually, but you might still have football or college sports, but because of the optics, you might not be able to implement that.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's easy for me to make some conjecture on stuff because I don't know anything, and this is all just amongst our friends and off the record.
Sure.
And hi, Rich, how you doing?
Sure.
But like from my standpoint, this is the fact that some of these things are opening before other things, and how we're going to learn so much about how these things go that even the best laid plans will ultimately adapt and evolve. And I think adaptation here is going to be the key phrase, because we don't know what's going to happen. But there is, as a fan, as someone who makes a living in this space, I want to see my teams come back. I was hoping the Maryland Terrapins finally had a decent team this year. We thought maybe we'd go to the Final Four. It's going to be many dark years, I think, before we have a chance to get back there, and we missed that opportunity. So no one wants to see these things ripped away. No one wants to see the student athletes. What do you do if you're a Pac-12 student and for some reason student athlete, and for some reason your team is not playing? What does that do? You have another year of eligibility, but you have another class coming in next year. What does that mean for the number of scholarships in a program? Are you allowed to stay? The NCAA has addressed a little bit of this, but do schools want those kids to stay? And it's just a shame all around. And as someone who, kind of walked on my team and had my few college moments, like those are the memories you have, is like being there at the Penn Princeton game for me, and the upset we had over Villanova when I was there, and things like that. Those are the moments that you really treasure. And I feel bad for all those kids who go to these schools, the majority of whom aren't doing it to play in the pros.
And a lot who make a lot of sacrifices, and it's tough. It's more difficult being a student athlete than you may believe. You may get a scholarship, you may not. Even if you have a scholarship, you have to sacrifice. You are doing double duty. You are being an athlete, and you are being a student, and you're making that's a difficult road to hoe. And you really got to feel for these kids. But what you mentioned, which is interesting for football, because let's be honest, that's a bit of the North Star for Fox, both college and sports, college and pro. Football is going to get the benefit of seeing the NBA, the MLB, other sports, NHL, which we haven't talked about, which is also an interesting case, and I'd love to know if you have any insight on that. The NFL is going to, in college sports or college football, are going to get to see some of the trial and error of these other sports. Do you have any thought? First off, hockey, let's not shortchange that. Have you heard anything on that tip in terms of the NHL? Because it's another very timely sport. And two, to what extent is there any conversation or any purview from the sports that have some time until they're supposed to start towards the sports that are in a time crunch, namely the NBA, the NHL, and to a lesser extent, Major League Baseball?
Yeah, I mean, again, I know what I read around hockey, and I haven't read kind of the latest there, but I did read somewhere where the fact is you're not touching the ball, right? You're not all touching the ball. You're wearing gloves, actually. You're holding a stick, and you're hitting a puck, but you're not actually physically touching the puck at any time. So there's no real transferring there. Yes, you wear a shield and your helmet, and there's a little bit of, physicality to it. But it's not like UFC, and it's not like basketball where your body's touching someone and then you're touching the ball that guy touched, and then you're passing it to someone else who's touching that ball. So hockey, to me, feels like if you're going to take the fan experience out of it, and you can figure out a way to travel the teams, the actual, if you have the testing in place and all the things we talked about before, I'm less worried about transmission on an ice skating rink than I would be on a basketball court and things like that. I just think the optics of how that works. Now, again, someone could sneeze on you, and we don't know exactly whether that is a way.
Yeah, but the NBA, you're literally rubbing skin to skin every possession, every minute,
Right.
It's unique.
Right. That's right.
Even baseball, how often does a baseball player touch another baseball player?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
You have a catcher and a pitcher touching a ball, and the players do touch a ball, but for the most part, there's much less contact in a sport like that. So to your question about sports leagues are absolutely going to learn from what the trials and hopefully not too many errors of the organizations that go before them. And I think they'll be smarter about it, and they'll be able to go in. I mean, we'll see what happens in the fall. There's talk of a second wave. You've been all over this stuff, and we don't know what it's going to look like. But the timing of this pandemic on the sports calendar was very fortuitous potentially for the football world, which got through its season in completion and now has time to kind of reassess things before their new season starts. So yeah, they're going to miss OTAs, or they're going to miss spring practice and all those things. But for the most part, if we are able to get back to some sense of normalcy and quote unquote open up by September, some of these leagues will have been very fortuitous in terms of just the timing of all this hitting. We got through a Super Bowl that has been reported. I saw it put out there. Lachlan mentioned on our conference call yesterday that I'm sure Rich Greenfield was on, that that was a $600 million day. That one day for Fox. So
real quick question. We can envision a Week 7 NFL game, no fans. The fucking Super Bowl's not happening without fans. Am I wrong on that? Are we seeing a Super Bowl happen in 2021?
If the season goes on as hoped, and you could very well see one without fans, if that's what it comes to. If that's what it comes to, let's put it this way. Let me ask the question back at you. If your option is to hold a Super Bowl with no fans or not have a Super Bowl at all, what are you going to choose?
I guess, to stay consistent, you're in my view on this, you're going to have the Super Bowl.
So anyway, I think that you're going to have, if you can play through these games, and if it doesn't have a second wave, and I hope for all of our society, we don't have a wave that's big enough to really start stressing our hospital systems again, and our frontline responders and all the people who are caring, while we get to sit here and do sports and talk on BNN and be blessed like that, then we have bigger problems if we're not able to continue these types of things, and I hope we don't. So hopefully we can do it. We could survive as sports fans a year with no fans in the arena. The question is whether I hope we don't have it, but a question is, could you survive a year of no Coachella? I don't know if that's possible. I'm more concerned about that for you than I am for our ability
Oh,
to
man.
survive sports without fans.
I mean, I hammered it pretty hard for a few years there on the music festivals, but I'm not the only one. I mean, you know, we're obviously thinking of that as well. And I mean, more so just, and this is something I was talking about on a philosophical level with a friend of mine the other day, is that, you know, contemporary America kind of got used to having these really intense live events, really intense sporting events, music festivals, music experiences, these installations, Museum of Ice Cream. This became a thing. Creative Artist Agency opened up an entire new division. Friends of mine and I was even circling some deals with them when this all went down. Of okay, how do we do really creative new live events? This was a thing. And when do we go back to that? Is that something that is now going to be looked at as this little blip on the radar of American history, 2014 to 2020, of music festivals and shareable items and these highly attended, highly concentrated mass live events? And that's a really interesting, I mean, we kind of took it for granted there for a minute or two that we had opportunities to just have incredible experiences.
Maybe I'm more of an optimist than some, and I've spoken to people about this who just feel that the world has changed permanently and we'll never get back to those things. And I don't feel that way at all. I think we're going through a time now where we don't have a vaccine. We don't know a lot about this disease. It is a novel coronavirus, so we're trying to figure it out. So the question is, when you don't know a lot about what these things are, and you're having data that shows that maybe they're more, you know, stringent, tougher, lethal, et cetera, than the flu and other things, and you get into a situation where you're going to shut things down and you're going to go through this whole experience when you're in a non-vaccine environment. Eventually, I believe, you know, medical ingenuity will prevail and we will have a vaccine. But I also think we as a people, there are two things. Number one, we are very resilient as a people.
We are.
And number two, we yearn for human connection and shared experiences. So you put those two things together, and let's talk about resiliency. You know, I see Dave Rose on here and everything, and I have a bunch of friends who, Neil Glatt, who, you know, former president of the New York Jets, and these guys live in New York City. And at 9/11 happened, and I remember everyone telling me, "I'm never living downtown. I'm never going to live in Tribeca is the hottest part of New York City, highest value in real estate." These things have come back. I remember going to the first major sporting event in the United States after 9/11 was the 2002 Super Bowl in New Orleans at the Superdome. It was Tom Brady's first Super Bowl, Patriots-Rams. And that was the first mass gathering for America at one of these kind of big events where the eyes of the world are watching and you're concerned about what does this mean. And all of a sudden, it's the first time I ever walked through a metal detector to get into a stadium.
Sure.
Now, if I go to Coachella or I go to an event and I don't walk through a metal detector, now I feel weird. Wait, why am I not being checked? Why are they not asking me to put my cell phone in a little dish and put it around? We have been sensitized to it. So what do sporting events and concerts look like X number of years from now? Well, maybe this passes, we have vaccines, herd immunity's kicked in, we're all fine and nothing changes. Or maybe we're going into an event and we're getting our temperature read. Or maybe we have to carry something with us that says we've been tested or we haven't come in contact with someone because there's contact tracing. Or maybe there's some tests you actually have to do to get in. That's the extreme. I'm making this up. I have no idea. But the idea is like people are going to come back for these experiences, I fully believe. You know, you and I have had many conversations about the ticketing business.
Sure.
And the ticketing business and the live entertainment business has been directly affected by this. And I believe the people I've spoken to in the ticketing world believe that it's a dimmer, not a light switch. It's not either all off or all on, that these things are going to kind of slowly come back and be on, and maybe they get turned down a little bit or turned up, and we're going to play with the dial.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I hear you. And your points about resiliency and about it does play into, you know, what we were discussing before, that if the incentives are powerful enough, people will make the sacrifices to make it happen. And I think that's something endemic may be the wrong word, but something that is just in all of us, and is gonna manifest itself as society opens up and we start to see some of these scenarios that we're all speculating on right now be played out.
Look, the first time you walk into Craig's when they reopen, Matt, I know you're going to sidle up to the bar and you're going to make some joke with some girl turns around and you're going to be like, hey, I maybe shouldn't be this close to you. And, oh, by the way, there's Jay Lux in the corner. Should I go get too close to Jay? And then I think the third, fourth, fifth time you go to Craig's, I don't think you're going to think anything about it. I think you're just going to normalize very, very quickly. And that's my hope, is that we get there.
Listen, all our hopes are that we get back quickly enough to the point at which it's commonplace, it's expected, it's normalized to walk into Craig, to go to Craig's, walk in. It seems very calm outside, and there's just a madhouse inside. And then you look over to the left, someone's pouring a cocktail, and you look a little bit more to the left, and it's Jay Lux holding court, doing what he does better than anyone ever could. So God bless Jay, God bless Craig and Craig's. And I think we took it for granted, and I look forward to enjoying it for many years into the future. All right, so we talked about a lot of, we gave everyone the goods on what everything in the sports world is looking like right now. I have not been following this orgy story. I got to be honest.
Wow, you skipped right to the orgy story instead of gambling, sports gambling. Wow, that's how we're going. Different form of gambling.
All right, let's go gambling. Okay, let's fucking do it. Real quick, guys. Dave has been, since I remember about 18 months ago, you and I were sitting down and you were telling me, you know something, I'm going to take this job at Fox. I'm going to take this job at Fox. And I think that they've given me the mandate to figure out digital for a major sports network. One of the things that I think is really critical for this world is gambling. I think the implementation, the integration of gambling into the sports world is going to be really critical. This is a topic that you've been at the forefront of. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, look, I think the idea of online sports gambling, the kind you can do from your computer or your cell phone, from where you are without having to go into a casino or some form of a sports book. There's a lot of stats out there about just how much more people are willing to wager. And I think, look, there are some people who do gambling to make money, and some people, candidly, it's a problem, and gambling can be an addiction, and there's all kinds of responsible gambling practices that need to take place. But I believe that there is a large subset of American sports fans that are the people who fill out their March Madness bracket, even if they haven't seen all these teams play. They're the ones who do a Super Bowl grid, a Super Bowl weekend, because they like the idea of some friendly competition with their friends. And that is a far bigger tent, and that's a far bigger opportunity in terms of the number of fans that I think would put $5, $10, $20 down on something just to make it interesting, or do a few prop bets to see what fun things happen. And it's a really great opportunity for sports leagues and sports networks to increase engagement. I ran Yahoo Sports at kind of the first wave of fantasy sports, and we had a really great product, and we were the leader in the space at the time. And it was a real driver of fan engagement around it. You found yourself watching games and teams and caring for players you never would have cared about before. So I think gambling has that opportunity to do it, even on a completely different level. And I'm excited about it. What I think is interesting, and the reason it ties into this conversation, which is kind of a post-COVID sports world, the idea of online sports gambling requires state legislature approval. It has to pass, the lawmakers to get through. And there was a belief that, last season we had 2 states, Pennsylvania and New Jersey, go first. And there was a belief that, we might get 5 to 8 more this year for football season, which could be interesting. But now you have all these states that are going to go broke. They're losing massive amounts of revenue. There's a big question. There's a big question about, is the federal government the lender, if you will, of last resort for states, or just for enterprises and people? And what happens to the state infrastructure? And I'm not up on my municipal law and budgetary work these days. I know you've been following a lot of people who talk a lot about that. But from my perspective, if you want to make money, the two easiest ways to kind of spin up new revenue streams in your state are legalization of marijuana and online sports gambling. And you see certain states doing it. And these are ways, you know, they can stay on any moral high ground that they want, but they will track it, they will tax it. And by the way, when it comes out from behind the shadows that maybe a lot of the sports wagering has been in the past, you're going to have a product that I think is really fun, accessible, hopefully done responsibly, and is a way for the people who are willing to wager a little bit, a way to generate some tax revenue for the state and the city. So, you know, we're investigating, exploring all this. We have some deals in the space as a company. This is, you know, to use a bad sports analogy, but this is the top of the first inning of this game. It's going to be a very long game, and we're going to play it out over time, but you're going to see a lot of innovation and activation in this space, I think. And it's a really fun reason to be in a place like Fox or any of the major networks, or the leagues for that matter, because this is another wave of value. And by the way, if you're a team owner and you're wondering what the value of your franchise is, and you're thinking about, oh, have we peaked in terms of the value? I don't know that, you know, maybe these leagues have always been very good at finding new revenue streams. And just when you think one thing has peaked, there's something else that ends up providing value. And, you know, this concept of an integrity fee that leagues want to charge and things like that, that's a whole other BNN episode we could do. But there's money in it for everyone in the chain. And at the end of the day, I think it's just going to bring more eyeballs to the sporting events, which help leagues, players, networks, cable companies, et cetera.
I love it. No, those are all great points. Your point about states, once again, it's all about incentives. States being incentivized to accept changes and gravitate towards policy they would not otherwise gravitate towards because of exigent circumstances is a fantastic point, and I think one that's gonna show itself a lot. Okay, we'll wrap up on a human interest item. I haven't followed the orgy story. I haven't followed this one. This has been burning. Earl Thomas, NFL player, Pro Bowler Earl Thomas. This story's been burning up sports media. I haven't been following it. Dave Katz is going to give us the breakdown, and I'll see what I have to say about it.
It pains me to say this. Last night I got a text from Mr. Dave Rose, who was on this, saying, "Uh-oh." And I saw, you know, Earl Thomas's name, and Earl Thomas being the all-pro safety for my Baltimore Ravens. And whenever I see Dave Rose post something that says, "Uh-oh," I'm like, oh, this is not good. So I guess what happened, TMZ reported it, that Earl Thomas, who was a standout for the University of Texas and lives, I guess, in Austin in the offseason and is married, was caught in bed in some type of orgy situation with not only two women, or maybe more, I don't know how many women it was, but his brother as well, who had picked him up and taken him to this house of ill repute, Airbnb that they had set up. This is all secondhand. I cannot report or confirm any of this. I'm sure it's hearsay, although Earl did come out on his own and give an early statement that he was going to be on TMZ, trying to get ahead of the story. And then I think the kicker to it was evidently his wife pulled a gun on him and had a bullet in the chamber. She thought she took the clip out, but there was a bullet left in the chamber. Thank God she did not. She had her finger on the trigger, supposedly. Thank God she did not pull anything, so to speak. I know I'm gonna get something in the comments about that statement. And then Earl Thomas is healthy. Hopefully they can figure it out. God bless Earl Thomas. God bless the 14-2 Baltimore Ravens of last year. This is their year. Ravens v. Seahawks Super Bowl in Tampa Bay. What do we think? Russell Wilson versus Lamar Jackson. Can we get there? I feel pretty good about it.
Got it. Well, you know something? I've never found a way to be that into the Baltimore Ravens other than the one season they won the Super Bowl with just, I'd say, the best defense of the modern era. Ray Lewis, Tony Siragusa, just a fucking everyone. If there was a Pro Bowler defensive player that year, they had him. But, you know, my bladder, after all this wine that I've drank, is telling me that we need to wrap this puppy up. We have given everybody a lot to digest. We've covered the entire sports landscape. We've given people a deeper understanding of how sports broadcasting works, rights-wise, production-wise, how networks relate to teams, to leagues. I think people learned a lot. Dave, thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. Hey, I forgot to tell you, I was sponsored by Sagamore Rye tonight, so thank you to all the great folks at Sagamore. You need to start doing more advertorial on BNN. You've earned it at this point.
I'm trying to keep things as pure as possible. We'll get to the advertorial when the numbers are a little bigger.
Thanks, brother.
My man, thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for joining in. Dave, this is great.
Thanks, Matt. Take care, everyone. Be safe.
Let's get a last few comments in here. See if anyone has anything to say. Giles, love you, bro. Thank you, guys. That was great. I mean, this is something that people are always interested in. They take for granted and not understanding how the mechanics of the sports broadcasting world works. It's absolutely fascinating. Ashley, hey there. Hey, Steph, dude, a couple of you, we went an hour and a half. You guys that was a captivating conversation. So much great information from Dave. Yes, super. And once again, one of the reasons why sports is so interesting right now is because sports right now is the proxy for working out so many of the questions, of answering so many of the questions that we have right now. And I think it's fascinating. So guys, thank you for participating. Thank you again to Dave. Thank you to Brianna, who like turned my background from a wall and a fucking vent into this. And everyone have a great night.